Hello there, my name is Jonathan McIntosh, and in this video I would like to talk to you about the relationship between music and society on the Indonesian island of Bali. To do that, I will start by outlining various aspects of Balinese social structure and by talking about how people organise themselves into various groups. This will then allow me to discuss the relationship between language and the Balinese performing arts, and how language is a key indicator for revealing many various points to the audience. Finally, towards the end of the video, I will examine the impact of social structure on musical performance, and particularly the way in which musicians and other performing artists organise themselves into various groups. So let's begin by talking about social structure. In Bali, social life is ordered by a version of the Hindu caste system, which still persists despite pan-Indonesian models of egalitarianism. The term caste system refers to corporate social units that are ranked and generally defined by descent, and individuals belonging to specific castes need never meet as a whole in one place. Nevertheless, all members of a specific caste share a concern for its rank and morality. In Bali there are 4 castes, which in descending order are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaisya and Sudra. In the Balinese caste system, the first 3 caste categories only account for 6 to 10% of the population. Individuals belonging to this small percentage of the population are also collectively called Traiwangsa. This is a word that's made up of 2 terms, Trai, which means 3 in Middle Balinese, and Wangsa, which means people. The people in this group, the Traiwangsa, are sometimes also referred to as Jeroan, a term which means insiders. Most Balinese, however, belong to the lowest caste, the Sudra caste, and individuals that belong to this group are sometimes referred to as Jaba, or outsiders. The terms Jeroan and Jaba are also used in relation to the classification of music and dance in Bali. The word Jeroan, meaning insider, refers to the inner courtyard of a Balinese temple, a context in which wali or sacred forms of music and dance are performed as ritual offerings to the gods of the Bali Hindu religion. Similarly, Jaba, meaning outside or referring to outsiders, refers to the outermost courtyard of a Balinese temple, or the space just outside a Balinese temple on the road. This is where secular, or Balihan, forms of music and dance are performed for the entertainment of both the gods and human beings. The middle courtyard of a Balinese temple is known as the Jaba Tengah, and this is a space in which ceremonial offerings of music and dance, the Bali, are performed. So, as you can see from the image present on the slide here, the Balinese temple is depicted with 3 courtyards, and as you move in from the road through the courtyards, you move towards the innermost courtyard, which is the most sacred part of the temple, and that's where wali performances take place. The middle part of the temple is the Jaba Tengah, where ceremonial performances take place, and then you have the Jaba, which is where you have secular performances. And if a temple only has 2 courtyards, the Jaba space is seen to be the area just outside of the temple on the road. So this is a link between caste organisation and music and dance classification in Bali. Now, in Bali, the caste system is not as strict as that which still operates in India. However, it is still important in formulating how members from different castes interact with one another, especially when it comes to various language levels of the Balinese language. Like the Javanese language in Central and Eastern Java, the Balinese language is organised into various levels of speech. These levels fit the caste divisions of Balinese society. And generally, although there are 4 caste divisions, there are only 3 levels of Balinese. Those in the Brahmana caste speak High Balinese, which is known as Basa Alus. Kshatriya and Vaisya tend to speak Middle Balinese, Basa Medial, and those in the Sudra caste speak Common or Low Balinese, Basa Kasar. Much of the language spoken in these 3 levels is common to all speakers in all ranks. These words, however, tend to belong to the Middle Balinese or Basa Media category. There are, however, some words that are used which are expressed by 2 or 3 different words, and these words are specific to the various caste levels. Some of these are completely different, while others are only slight differentiations. However, the distinction is mainly between words used in High and Low Balinese. There are also words used by low caste individuals when addressing Brahmanas and nobles. It should also be noted that High Balinese, Basa Alus, contains a much larger number of Old Javanese or Kawi and Sanskrit words when compared with the number of words in these languages that are used in Low Balinese. So how does this work in practice? Well, on this slide here I have examples of Balinese words used by different castes. So the pronoun I, in High Balinese they use the term titiyange, in Middle Balinese they use the word titiyang, in Low Balinese it's tiang, and in very kind of rough, low-level language speaking, individuals might use the term chang. So you can see titiyange, titiyang, tiang, chang. It's like shorter versions of the High Balinese term. The next example, the verb to sleep, is very different though. In High Balinese and Middle Balinese, the speakers use the term sirap, whereas in Low Balinese they use the term masare. There's also a kasar form of the verb to sleep, which is pulas. However, sirap and misare only ever denote the sleeping of human beings. Pulas is a term that refers to the sleeping of animals, for example. So a dog pulasses and a cat pulasses. A dog never misares or sirops. And then the noun flower. Sekar is the term that's used in High Balinese and Middle Balinese, whereas in Low Balinese they use the term bunga. Those words are very different as a Westerner looking at the Balinese language. So those are some examples of the words that are used in various language levels. And the use of language has important implications in Balinese society. Moreover, the relative status of speaker and hearer and the rank of person or persons spoken about have implications that impact on the use of language. Social status in Bali therefore depends on three areas or kind of contexts: the caste of the person, the age of a person, where an individual is either younger or older, and on the relative position of an individual within a larger group, for example within an extended family or village. So just to explain this idea, if you are a high caste Brahmana and you are talking to a low caste Sudra, the Brahmana person will speak down, so they will use low Balinese in order to talk to the Sudra person. However, in the same conversation, the Sudra person must speak up to the Brahmana person because they have a higher social status and rank within the Balinese caste system. So the Sudra speaker should use high Balinese when addressing a Brahmana person. The same is true if a younger person is talking to a older person, and if you were talking to a position with a person with authority in a village, such as a priest, for example, or the head of a village. So how does this then relate to the performing arts? Why is the caste system and language levels important? Well, in the Balinese performing arts, language plays a vital role in defining notions of halus and kasar characters and their associated forms of movement and dance styles in various theatrical genres. For example, in shadow puppet plays, wayang kulit performances, there are kings and queens and nobles that speak in high Balinese, or they use the old Javanese Kawi language. Whereas in the same performance, there are servants of these characters, and they usually converse in colloquial or low Balinese. Servant characters are clowns, known as Trondong, which is a kind of female servant, Bundasar, which is a male servant, or Bondres, which is a clown. These characters are important because they translate the words of high caste characters from Old Javanese, Kawi, or High Balinese into everyday vernacular Low Balinese. So this means that the audience watching the performances, who the majority of whom will be Sudra caste, Low Balinese, they can still follow the performance. So the clowns and the servants translate the language of their masters in order to communicate the storyline to those in the audience. So such a process of translation enables the audience to follow the details of a given plot or storyline. But even without language, we can see these status relationships and the halus and kasar notion of how performers behave, characters behave, and how they move in performance. So just as in Java, when we have wayang kulit performances, in Bali, high caste or halus characters tend to have very refined features, as we can see from this puppet on the right hand side of the screen. And this is contrasted by kasar characters that have larger features, open mouths, wide eyes, for example, and they move in a very unrefined manner. Another example from the Balinese performance context is a genre known as Arju, which is a kind of comic folk opera, so it involves actors who sing and speak with gamelan musical accompaniment, and it also has improvised speech sections which help to tell the story or develop the narrative. Here we can see two characters. There's a refined character and so a halus character, and then a keras or an unrefined character. The halus character is the person standing up, and it's also a female dressed up as a male character. You can see the differences between the costuming, particularly the headdress that's worn by the refined character. And then you can see this contrast with the headdress that is worn by the low character. And you can also see the status relationship because the male character here is kneeling down to the high caste character. So characters who sit down and characters who stand up, the standing up characters are the halus or the high caste characters, and those sitting down, paying homage to their masters, are low caste characters. And then that denotes use of language and the performance movement styles that these characters perform. So we've talked about social organisation, the use of language, and then how this is reflected in the performing arts. So now I want to come back to social organisation and talk a bit more about how the Balinese organise themselves into groups and how this relates to musical performance. In Bali, group identity prevails over individual experience. So the group is always more important than the individual. And one of the best examples of combining people in groups in Bali is the concept known as seka. The term seka denotes a community organisation, and every seka has its own rules and is organised in relation to various tasks and activities. These activities range from assisting with preparations in the lead up to a temple celebration, or participating in music and dance groups. Or it could even be a seka that's organised in order to go and pick up rubbish that's been mounting up in a particular part of a village for a long time. However, the key to the success of all seka is that the organisation highlights the importance of the group over that of the individual. Equality is the rule, with any financial profits being shared as a result of the activity equally among the members of the group. With reference to his discussion of the term seka, the American anthropologist Ward Keeler links the social ethos of the seka to that of a gamelan ensemble. In doing so, he states that Balinese groups never attain the impersonal generality, nor do they differentiate and graduate individuals like many Western organisations. Instead, they combine people in interlocking sets, while neither implicating nor abstracting their persons. So what is Ward Keeler saying in this quote? Well, to paraphrase it, he's saying that in Bali they have quite a different notion of forming groups maybe than we have in Western settings, and that when people participate in a group, they're treated as being equal in a Balinese context. And in doing so, they draw on the individual skills of people in these groups. The notion of seka and the way in which Ward Keeler discusses it, he also relates it to the musical practice known as kotakan. And this is a slide from a previous video, but it's good to talk about it again because it links into Ward Keeler's argument about social organisation and musical organisation in the Balinese context. So kotakan refers to interlocking patterns that are prevalent throughout Balinese Gamelan music. And the two patterns that make up kotakan, they are two independent parts that form a continuous melodical line. So there are two parts, there's polos and sangsi. Polos tends to follow the melody or the pokok, and then sangsi interlocks and interacts with polos. So whenever there's a gap in the polos pattern, that's where sangsi will fill that gap. In many Kotikan parts, the polos part coincides with the important structural points of the music. For example, polos tends to coincide with the striking of the gong again in a Balinese Gamelan ensemble. And this point of coincidence is another important example that helps contribute to Judith Becker and Alton Becker's argument about the importance of coincidence in Javanese and Balinese Gamelan music. So we've talked about Seka, which is group organization, which stresses the collective rather than the individual and valuing everybody's participation, and how Kotikan is a way of grouping people that play gamelan music together to have two parts that contribute to one musical line. And then there's also another important concept which is linked to socio-musical relations in Bali. And this is the way in which people play together in a Balinese ensemble and how this notion of playing together is reinforced. So the Balinese concept of Leia, not to be confused with Princess Leia from Star Wars, also highlights very important parts of Balinese musical performance. The term Leia denotes notions of precision and togetherness that are integral to Balinese Gamelan music. In order to play together, however, the authority within the gamelan ensemble is shared among several key players. These players include the lead metallophone player, the instrument known as the ugal, the drums, which are the kandan, the lead melodic rack of chime gongs, which is called a trombone, and the elaborating rack of chime gongs, the reon. So for example, the lead, before talking about that, let's just talk about what these instruments look like, going back to the Michael Tenzer reading. So these four instruments are highlighted in red on this slide. So we have the ugal, which is on the left of the screen, and that's the lead metallophone. It's the tallest metallophone, and sometimes you might have two ugals, but usually the one at the front will be the lead metallophone player. You have the kandan, which are the drums, the trombone with its 10 chime pots, which is usually, if it's used in a gamelan gong kubyar ensemble, positioned towards the front. And then on the right hand side you have the reon, which is a series of 14 chime pots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 on this one in the picture. And it's performed by 4 musicians, interlocking patterns together. So let's go back and talk about the ugal in particular, and as you can see from this picture on this slide, I couldn't find a picture of a Balinese ugal performer. This is a picture from Balinese Gamelan Ensemble in London, but you can see that the lead metallophone is quite a tall instrument, and the player sits on a stool behind this instrument, and it raises the height of the player so that he or she can be easily seen by all the other players in the ensemble. In addition, this player, the ugal player, has a different type of hammer. It's much larger than the other metallophone, than the hammers used by the other metallophone players. And this is so that when the ugal player signals a change or in the melody, or to move from one section to the other, they raise their hammer into the air and they lift their body, and then they bring them down as the player strikes the keys of the metallophone. So being on a stool and having a different hammer, that's a larger hammer that people can see, is also a sign of the authority that's given to this performer, and it helps to bring all the players together and keep the piece moving in performance. So that's one example of the different players kind of exercising a sense of authority in a Balinese Gamelan ensemble. But how does this notion of authority and leading a music ensemble fit with this notion of Seka, where everybody is considered to be equal, and the fact that Seka downplays the notion of individuality? Well, Ward Keeler says that because there are specific players or instruments within a Balinese Gamelan ensemble that help lead a performance, there is clear authority that's exercised by single players. And this notion of exercising authority is quite different to the way in which Javanese Gamelan ensemble players play together. Because in Bali, people have to denote or exercise authority because the music is composed in quite a strict fashion, and because of the kotikan, the interlocking patterns, the music has to hold together in a very specific way or else it will just fall apart. So because of the interlocking, there's very little room for improvisation. And this contrasts Balinese music with Javanese Gamelan music, for example. And you need people in order, in a Balinese Gamelan ensemble, to exercise authority to indicate sudden shifts in tempo and volume. So while it could therefore be said that Balinese Gamelan perhaps maybe does not have the delicate nuances found in Javanese Gamelan music, although such a statement's not totally correct, Balinese Gamelan music combines individual efforts in a much more dynamic way through the group interaction and action that happens in a gamelan performance. So to this end, the musical patterns, especially the concepts of kotikan and social forms of organisation such as seka and laya, which denotes precision and togetherness, these terms are all reflected in gamelan music performance. So there's a link between social organisation and musical performance. So to conclude this video, I've outlined various aspects of Balinese social structure, particularly the caste system and how this relates to how people organise themselves into hierarchical groups in the Balinese context. These hierarchical groups in the caste system speak various levels of the Balinese language, and in the performing arts, status and language provide key clues in performances. So we can tell by the way a performer moves and sings and speaks in a performance, we can tell their social status. And how they interact with others also gives us other clues about this. And then finally, I've examined the impact of social structure on musical performance in Bali, and how organising people into musical groups as sekas then influences the precision that groups play with.